a true legend in the Indian software industry.
Whenever software is created, you are creating something for the future. Software is always a work in progress, and if you model it any other way, you will fail. If you want to win this game, you need to be focused on your expertise all the time. One, the journey of learning is individual. Two, don't expect validation. अगर आप efficiency और excellence पे focus करोगे तो आपको rewards भी मिलेगा. This is the other piece. The world is a very fair place.
Correct.
I have another favorite. You should have been in your future designation for 1 year before you take it up.
Absolutely.
When you're 21, 22, don't worry about your compensation. It's the last thing you need to think about. Worry about whether you get a chance to learn. Spend 5 years learning everything that you can learn. AI is there, but it's just a tool for us.
It's not the answer, it's not the goal. No. The goal is solving the problem.
Yes. Know the deployment of the solution before you start designing the solution. If you are focused on problem solving, you're looking for every angle you get to solve the problem.
Right. In today's episode of SCALER Pod, we have Mr. Shekar Sivasubramanian with us, a true legend in the Indian software industry. He has been working in the Indian IT ecosystem when it was in bare infancy. He started his career in 1985, almost 40 years now, 4 decades of inspiring journey. Interestingly, he did his BTech in mechanical engineering from IIT Bombay back in 1985. And he was the first batch of engineers to join Tata Consultancy Services, TCS, which was back then, sir, I believe at that time the entire IT industry was few thousand people at best. And probably you were the part of first large batch that was hired by TCS, maybe a team of 100 or 200 people. It's a privilege to host you on this session.
Thank you.
Not just a deep technologist who have been working in the domain of AI for many decades, even when it was not cool, it was something of a research lab. At the same time, Shekar sir is deeply spiritual as well. So Shekar sir is not only a deep technology enthusiast, having worked in AI and ML for many decades, even before it was something of a cool buzzword. He is deeply spiritual as well. We were just talking that how spirituality and technology merges the moment that someone starts going deep into either of these. So welcome to SCALER Pod, sir.
Thank you.
To begin with, I would love to hear from you. How have you seen this entire IT and even global IT ecosystem emerge in last 40 years? 1985, when internet was not even a thing. It was just about getting developed in the labs by DARPA, etc. And coming today, where we all have a device as powerful as supercomputers of 1985 in our pockets, which is connected at a speed which is thousands of times faster than the speed that the biggest computer on Apollo mission had. Right? So you have seen this entire journey. If we start, would love to hear your thoughts on how do you see, starting with, tell us about, when you were maybe 21-year-old, just finished your degree and starting out as a software engineer back in 1985.
Sure, thank you. It's all about when you're born, at which period of time you're born. And I've been kind of lucky to have been born in an age where we kind of did not even have the radio, and then did have a radio and then a television, which we would see in other people's houses, and then we had it in our own house. And then onward with a very gentle look at technology over a period of time. So the early parts of technology in India particularly was largely defined by the fact that there were significant resource constraints. One of the, and this is not just in India, it was around the world. The first technology forays, a little known information, TCS itself was created in 1967.
Very interesting.
So the thought process that the organization had was well ahead of its time. And naturally, we learn, maybe it's the bamboo, if I recollect, you put a lot of water and then suddenly it grows. So it was somewhat similar. It was a belief of one person, Mr. Kohli, and then onward, that came into existence over a period of time. Now it's one of the largest companies in its space. So the first bits of technology was largely resource constrained. Even the programming footprints used to be very small. So you had to be very innovative with respect to the type of problem you were solving, which was always very, very small programs. Even the concept of software engineering came about in the 1980s. There were several players in the world in the emerging field of software engineering, people like Victor Basili, Ed Jordan, Tom DeMarco, who introduced the concept of how you engineer software. So software started growing from its infancy to starting to get into an engineered manner. At the same time, some of the resource constraints started falling. So the growth of the industry has had two parallel paths. One, how the industry has grown on two dimensions, both in compute as well as networking, to break all the barriers with Moore's law, etc. And then the adaptability of the human mind constantly to take advantage of that. So individuals who have the ability to adapt and redefine themselves and the problem on the basis of a very strong critical thinking, engineering, holistic thinking framework are the ones who can survive this 40 years. You cannot survive it by clinging on to an ideology that has lost its meaning. At the same time, you cannot get so ahead of yourself that you do not understand the constraints of usage. And when I say constraints of usage, it's not just technology. It's the human constraint, it's the uncertainty. By definition, whenever software is created, you are creating something for the future. One of the classic adages we have is for the user community. There's always the software developer and the user community, and always there is some, I won't say friction, but there's always there's a different interplay between them.
Accountable in a way.
Right.
That users keep the developers accountable.
That's right. And they will always say, until you give us something, we can only start thinking after that.
Right.
Which is not wrong. Software developers find it very difficult because they're there writing, in a contracting framework, being overly precise, extremely logical, and thinking, why are they changing these things? Well, the world keeps changing. One of the major learning that I have had in my career is software is always a work in progress. And if you model it any other way, you will fail. And there are some obvious logical reasons for it. So if you created software at a certain era, say in the 90s or 2000s or 2010s, you did it on the basis of your own capability, which was whatever it was, and on the tool sets that were available at the time. And then it took some time for you to create that particular solution, software, and then it took even further time for it to get adopted. So now you're 10 years hence. The software is working. It's running big banks or it's running all kinds of things. Then people will come and say, why did they design it like this? You cannot apply a post facto thinking without understanding the context of the manner in which it was created. Why is that important? Because it does two things. You give respect for the individuals who created it at the time, and you understand the transitions very well. You understand that these are incremental movements of large-scale systems that move from one context of existence and have to be systematically moved to a different context. Today, we have the aspiration, we can at least even talk about it as a market of one in everything we do. We can think of systems that can be highly individualized. That was not the case when we wrote software at the time. So the journey for us, for me particularly, is a couple of things. You need to be on top of your game. If you want to win this game, you need to be focused on your expertise all the time, which means you have to be very humble.
So you have spent 40 years writing code, and I believe you write code even today.
Yes, I do.
How do you learn today?
Some of it is dependent on the early forms of learning. So I've had a very fortunate life with very good parents. I come from a family of engineers. My grandfather was an engineer. He was a railway engineer. He was part of the person who built the Pamban Bridge, and he built several bridges in the South India. My dad is an electronics engineer who built several telephone exchanges. So it's a family that taught us, engineering was everything. I'm an engineer, my son also is. So hopefully by the time we would have done 150 years of engineering. So we were taught right from the beginning how to solve problems. So this was a very important aspect of, the way you got your foundations. And The other thing that we were taught is learning is a very individual action. I'm a huge believer of the Gurukul system. I get less excited when there's a big class. Even in my school, I was always an outlier. I was not the kid who would often listen to teachers. I was quite a mischievous kid and quite a handful. But I would do my work on time and I would learn by myself.
Right.
I can give you a very small anecdotal example. Class 8, I was told to write a simple essay, what is the solar system? So most kids gave a 2-page. I went to the British Council Library and gave a 52-page submission for a homework. And I drew every single planet. And I was so excited in class thinking that everybody would say it's an excellent piece of work that I have done. And so some other students' paper got corrected and he got 9 on 10 and I got 8 on 10. I learned 2 lessons. 1, the journey of learning is individual.
Right.
2, don't expect validation.
Right. You don't learn to get marks. You learn to learn.
No.
You
And
learn to
not
learn.
only that, it got disconnected at a very early age.
Correct.
Because those are the things that if you carry a lot,
Right.
it can remove you from the purity of the learning exercise.
Right.
And the more you immerse yourself and the more you rediscover yourself every time, but for that you should have both confidence. I often tell people, when we learn how to drive, a lot of people will came with common adages, no, it's okay to make mistakes. So I'll use an example. When we learn how to drive, we do not model learning how to drive saying that we will hit 25 people only, then we'll learn how to drive. That is not the way you learn. The way you learn is by being intensely aware in the process of learning.
Right.
And if you are very good at it, and I'm not, it's still a, even I'm a work in progress. Yeah, it's also a work in progress. So then you realize that, you discover a lot of things. The other piece, which is, I cannot overemphasize, this is something that I lament a lot even in today's world. You have to connect the dots. And many dots are not visible. So it's not as easy. So the ability to look for the tacit, the unsaid, the things that are not mentioned, but you have to have the cognitive ability, the humility, the capability to observe. So if you ask me one question, so if in the world of software, this is very classic, we have sessions with users. So often, while it appears to be a mechanical process, this is almost like the difference between me, who does not know how to play a flute, and Hariprasad Chaurasia ji, who does. It's the same.
Right.
The outcomes are also the same.
Right.
I will do noise and he will produce music, beautiful music. It's the same. That interaction, the jugalbandi and its outcome has to be very well understood. It's a craft.
Right.
It's not a science.
Right.
Now, engineers are taught science.
Right.
They're not taught explicitly art and craft.
Right.
They are not taught how to deal with the ambiguous.
Right.
They are not taught how to deal with the conflicts, the uncertainty, how to understand materiality. For them, things are very clear.
Right.
That translation is arguably the single greatest self-discovery process that will take people up several notches in their life.
Right.
And it's a difficult one.
Right.
You've got to listen hard. You've got to set aside your personality. You cannot say, I'm XYZ topper from A by C University. You cannot say anything about yourself. I've done all of those things in terms of academics, but I don't bring that in the equation.
Right.
You have to focus on the problem at hand.
Right.
You have to understand it for what it is worth, not just in an engineering sense, but in a complete sense. That's a difficult thing.
Right.
Because we're not taught to do that. We are taught one slice of the puzzle.
Right.
And somehow it is magically expected that you will translate that one slice to your life.
Right.
The risk is very high.
Right.
And the structures of institutions, organizations, the world at large, does not provide the expression of that self-discovery process, which is critical for us to reach the next level. As a country, as people, and as humanity. This has been my major, because I've been in situations where I've gone alone.
Right.
So the first project I was sent alone to Switzerland. I do not even know where it is. To Lausanne with about $20 in your pocket, approximately.
Which year was this, sir?
85.
Oh.
And that too with a very healthy advice from Mr. Kohli, who reminded me that I was from IIT and said, if you're so good, get the project done. Otherwise, don't come back. And I thought he meant it very seriously. So my entire 3 months there was fretting about my return ticket. And I got it done. And I got it done alone. And it's not a statement of ego. It's just that I put in a lot of hard work. I still remember the customer's name, Swiss German, who taught me, was a mathematical genius, who taught me several skills about how to work in a disciplined manner, how to solve problems in a certain manner.
Right.
And I did the whole thing. And I learned so much. And I would keep doing that then. Once you get into that habit,
Right.
it's habit forming, then you find it very difficult to work in any other way.
Right.
And you find it very difficult to not go for extraordinary challenges.
Right.
You're not scared because you've already done it a few times. That's the jump. And unfortunately, this does not come through grades.
Correct.
This does not come through marks.
Correct.
This does not come through competition. This comes through a different, you need to, that's where the spiritual and the science needs to kind of melt together to a certain extent.
So I would love to double click on that a little bit. You mentioned that spirituality and science often starts intermingling with each other. They start kind of becoming one. Can you tell us a little bit about that? That how did your exposure to this evolved over your journey?
Sure.
I'm sure it would have been a journey, an intellectual journey for yourself as well, since you were, let's say, in doing your undergrad and graduation
Yes.
and your experiences.
Yes.
So how did it evolve over the years?
Yes. So as all people at that age, and belonging to a conditioned social construct that we are a product of, that I was certainly a product of, you're expected to study. There is a pressure that you need to perform at a certain level to get a certain number of marks in order to do a certain degree and get a certain grade. So this is the statement that you go through. And at about 22, 23, this itself is more than a handful. And so you're worried about that. And it's almost as though you're distracted from the larger picture. Not necessarily willfully, but that's the consequence. And that is what happens in most cases. And so you go through the journey. And at some point, you also develop a level of personal proficiency. It gives you a sense of assurance that I'm confident of doing this. I can do these things. I'm not afraid. So that's very important. Because without that content, it's very difficult to reach for the next level of personal self-development. Otherwise, it appears very
It's
incomplete,
shallow.
shallow. It's exactly right, shallow. It appears very shallow. So you have to go through that tough phase. And then you start discovering patterns that are a little different. And then you start discovering probability-based outcomes. Probability is a very nice term behind which all of spirituality is hidden. Why was I born in the family that I was born is a probability-based question.
Yes.
But it's also a karma-based question. So you start linking the explanations. You start linking the context of the overall spirituality, not religion, spirituality that we are taught to explain things.
Right.
For us, it's a self-discovery process. And then you start creating linkages. You start understanding, oh, not everything that I do, that I feel I'm very good at is done by me. There is something that also happens outside of me, which I should be aware of, which I'm not able to explain with a great amount of clarity.
Right.
But I understand that it exists.
Right.
It brings, one of the greatest qualities it brings is humility. Nimitta matram, as we say, speck of dust. You're merely, see, I tell people, you've got a 70, 80 year lifespan, boss. Just be cool. Nahi hai.
Right.
Some people may get a few more and some people may get a few less. What do you do with it in terms of an overall construct in life is very important. So when you make those connections, then it becomes very interesting. One of the examples that we were discussing briefly some time ago was the example of, 50 years ago. And I say this all the time. Spirituality contains assumptions undiscovered by science. The moment it gets discovered, then the theory emerges, then the rationale emerges, then the proof emerges, then the products emerge, and people start taking it as reality. So the cell phone 40 years ago, say, if I had said that such a device is going to be made, they would have put me in a mental institution. But it's not that the underlying fundamentals of the product came into existence then. No, it was discovered.
Yes.
So the discovery process, if we accept, is part of spirituality and has some deep amounts of fundamentals there. Even if you look at the Hanuman Chalisa, Jugasahasra Jojan par Banu, Lilya Tahi Madhur Phal Janu. It is an exact description of the distance between the earth and the sun, told by Tulsidas. So how are you going to rationalize it? I will also say this about intense discoveries in the Western world. So if there is a Kepler who's looking at the movement of planets and is able to discover the time and the distance correlation, one is a square and one is a cube, that requires a different level of intensity. And so I always feel that aspect of life is a very important one that we must be aware of. Now, as human beings, I still write my simple programs. That's all I am capable of doing. I am not capable of too much else. So, but I understand that these factors are there, so it helps.
Recently, I also I was reading somewhere that some of the tribals in the Chhattisgarh region of India, Bastar, etc., for centuries they had the ability to be able to predict the lunar and solar eclipses very accurately.
Yes.
And they were able to predict it decades ahead.
Yes.
And science, in that sense, the science that we work with, it's a method that we have developed.
Correct.
And there are plenty other methods that could have been developed by different
Correct.
civilizations at different point in time.
Correct.
So I think the respect and humility both, that like we follow a certain method, even when we talk about our computer science and the AI and ML, but there could be many other methods of discovering the truth. And some of those might be ahead of us as well.
100%. See, the way societies are formed is to make sure that there is a certain amount of order.
Right.
The larger context of life is one of entropy, which is disorder.
Right.
So in order to make sure that you get a certain amount of order, you need to have a few things. You need to have a certain structure,
Right.
physically,
Right.
and then information structures. And there's information structures over a period of time flow through society, start getting decoded as ideologies or beliefs within society, and then get firmed up as techniques and methods of learning. I briefly remember, not sure, there were a set of folks from Russia or Croatia, I don't know which part from that part of the world, who we learn Euclidean geometry, which is straight line geometry. They proved it entirely using curved lines. That's a very complex thing to do, but it can be done. But all of us will learn 3 angles of a triangular 180 degrees, because that's what is the popular notion, that's what you're taught. Then you start constructing the next thing around it, you do rectangles, polygons, you create the whole world, not realizing that there are multiple alternate views of the world, that simply because of the lack of attention to them, we cannot assume they do not exist.
So
Even the thinking process.
I'll ask you a very, in a way, layman question, which maybe, most young folks who are watching this podcast, I'm sure, might have. You mentioned that the idea that we are nimitta matra. We are only a vehicle for some purpose. However, that begets a question that if the entire world is operated by certain rules, do I really have a free will? And if I do not, then why should I even do anything? Why should I even, so what is your, how do you answer that question?
Yeah,
now this is from science, it is more on
I
adhyatma.
understand. But it's an excellent question. It's one of the most, for most people, it's an intriguing question. And it is on the face of it. So you need to get to the answer actually through the Bhagavad Gita. So if you look at the entire Bhagavad Gita, so there's an extraordinary explanation that is provided by Krishna to Arjuna. The second last shloka is very simple and the most important one, second last or third last, where finally Krishna ends by saying, I've told you everything, it's your choice. That is super important. It resolves the crisis of being a nimitta matram and being in free will. When you get a certain level of knowledge of consequences of your behavior and actions. So that's one thing. You also recognize that your impact in the world should not be taken egoistically. That's a second thing. And then finally, you realize that you still have a free will and you must do the right thing. It's not in spirituality. It can apply as much to software design. Very simple. This is not a some unknown. So how do I write a software program? How do I implement encapsulation? How do I implement different techniques, object-oriented techniques? What is the right thing to do? What is the right level of design construct I must have? What are the abstractions I must employ? Have I done a thorough enough work? Do I understand the concept of when I release software, I must follow the one maxim, which is no known bugs. No known bugs is self-will. It is the commitment to say, I will write software and I will ensure that there are no known bugs. I want you to understand something else. This notion, the way the Indian or the overall software industry has come up, is kind of interesting. Again, it is a construct that is associated with large numbers of people neatly put into different roles. When I used to write software, I was the customer-facing person, the analyst, the designer, the programmer, the tester, the implementer. I believe they call it full stack. I don't know the term.
I think that term was not existent.
The term
wasn't
did
there.
not exist. You were just a guy who had to do stuff.
Right. Get shit done.
Yes, and you're the only person. So, you look around, you can get excited and pick up a mirror and say, go at it again.
Right.
So that's the world. That's the world we belong to. So when you're in that world, then unfortunately you cannot hand over responsibility to anybody else.
Right.
Also, your level of knowledge over a period of time is so deep about some subject that you will find it very difficult to explain complex themes to somebody else, and then you'll realize you might as well do everything yourself. With a level of professionalism, we call it professionalism. That's a choice.
Right.
Honesty, that's a choice. Ethics, that's a choice. That is where the two connect. That is the free will choice.
Right.
I have a choice. I can tell a customer, look, you are paying me by the hour, and I'm getting, say, making up some number, $30 an hour in India, say. This piece of work, I can get it done in 2 hours. So I will do it in 2 hours and give it to you.
Right.
Maybe there's a billing pressure to do it for a slightly longer period of time. What is the question? That is the question. What is your decision? That is your free will.
Right. Then you have a choice to make
You have
there.
a choice to make there. Which is why I used to always say align human ecosystems
Right.
where individuals don't have to go through this confusion every day.
And this is, yeah. अंतर्द्वंद जो एक बोलते हैं कि
इट्स वेरी डिफिकल्ट. हर इंसान को थोड़ी ना आप बोल सकते हो हर, तो वो डिफिकल्ट हो जाता है. तो आप सिस्टम ही ऐसा बना दीजिए जो एफिशिएंसी पे ज़्यादा फोकस करे. अगर आप एफिशिएंसी और एक्सेलेंस पे फोकस करोगे तो आपको रिवॉर्ड्स भी मिलेगा. दिस इज द अदर पीस. द वर्ल्ड इज अ वेरी फेयर प्लेस.
करेक्ट.
इट विल थोड़ा बहुत शॉर्ट टर्म में लगेगा कि रिवॉर्ड नहीं मिल रहा है, लेकिन मैं गारंटी से बोल सकता हूँ मेरे एक्सपीरियंस तजुर्बे के साथ, पक्का है लॉन्ग टर्म में आपको रिवॉर्ड मिलेगा ही मिलेगा. आपका एक्सेलेंस के लिए कोई भी ना नहीं बोलेगा, पक्का आप हाँ ही बोलेंगे. ऐसे आता है इसका.
So that is also another very interesting question that often, so when I teach to these young ones in 19, 20, 21-year-old, one part, as you were talking about, that software engineering is like, whatever has been built, let's say you are joining a company as an intern or as a young engineer, you are given a code base which is 10,000 files and millions of lines of code. Every single young engineer, or almost all of them, would come and complain to me, sir, their code base is so bad. And then there are choices that they need to make there. One example that often I take is that, any code base that existed have existed for long enough, and which is going to be the case with any successful company, right? It's like a city. You move into Bangalore. Bangalore is a city that has evolved over a few hundred years. The city is what it is. Now let's say if you are mayor of the city, would you like to be a mayor who only keeps complaining that why is this road built this way? Or do you figure it out? You appreciate the historical context of what exists at a place and for what reason, and you figure out how do you make it better. And I think again that while you are only in this code base, which if we compare with a beautiful city, which might have certain problems associated with it, but your goal is to make it better, and then in that process they will have to make many choices.
Correct. Correct. And coming down to that, because we're used to it, this is what we often do. often what happens is you need to have a whole host of applied techniques
Right.
that you A, have it from a knowledge perspective, and B, actually do it.
Right.
So a lot of people constrain themselves. See, the our education system in general tends to be exam oriented.
Right.
It needs to be more applied oriented.
Right.
My perfect school or my perfect classroom is one where you do not give marks to an individual student. Suppose the classroom has 30 people. You tell the entire class that I need the class's average to be 85.
Right.
Solve it.
Right.
There is not a single person who will score less than 75. You solve it. Now, when we are in workplace, that's what we are expected to do.
Correct.
Suddenly teamwork.
Correct.
When you're in a school, you have to compete with one another.
Right.
Why not teach them
Right.
non-competitive environments right at growing ages?
Right.
Then it is very natural. You always look and see, 2-3 weaker people, I'll carry them with me.
Right.
The other piece is we learn in a very segmented manner and we don't make connections. So if you're learning the technology, 7-layer communication protocol, you only think about that.
Right.
Then you write a compiler and you only think of BNF grammar and only think of that. Then you want to do something on a design in software with databases and normalization, you only think of that. A software complex code piece has an interplay of all of this in an undocumented, unknown manner. I would take a better example than a city and say that I prefer to consider our roles in this being a doctor, a surgeon,
Yeah.
with a patient.
Right.
Just because you have learned the fundamentals from Grey's Anatomy, you do not know what you will get when you open the patient up.
Correct.
And you should have the confidence and assurance to do it very well. The second thing that I would say, which is kind of funny, is I would say that's the only profession in software we write code and then we do QA. So we should do it with doctors, right? They do the operation, then open them up again and find out if it's done correctly, is it? So in the professions that require the highest risk and the highest uncertain outcomes are the ones that demand the highest professionalism from the person.
Right.
So why not take a leaf from that and do it yourself?
Right.
There is no need. You can build your own test, your test cases, you can write your test scripts, you can do the whole thing. Actually, it's very funny because good software developers know the soft parts of their
Right.
design very well.
Right. Right.
There is
I
no-
think this is a common thing that I have seen, that the best programmers that I have worked with, I was fortunate enough to learn and work along with them. The very first cut of code they will write, like while they might ponder on it longer, they might 95% of the time they might spend just thinking about it. But when they write the code, it will have that surgical precision.
You are exactly correct. In fact, this was a very accidental advantage we had in our early days.
Right.
Accidental advantage. We didn't have a computer when we were programming. You had to program on pen and paper.
Right.
That means you had to think.
You have to think. You don't type.
See,
you
the
think.
concept of typing
Yeah.
with today's the development environments, integrated development IDs, etc. It corrects your errors. It corrects your syntax errors.
Right.
It cannot correct your thinking.
Correct.
It's another crude analogy that I would often tell people is, just because I give a person a word processing software, say Microsoft Word, does not make you an author.
You're not going to make them Shakespeare.
Not an author. That thinking process, and by the way, the tools for thinking have not even been taught very well. For instance, in structured programming, the first thing that we were taught back in 1985 was something called NS charts, Nasi-Schneiderman charts. Nobody has heard of it. It's structured programming. It allows you to start thinking of pieces of code in a very systematic manner. Then you optimize your thinking right then. So you take about 6 pieces of paper, you tear up 3 or 4 because you got it all wrong, and then you come up with one and you look at it a lot. And when I'm traveling in local back from, downtown Mumbai to Wadhwani, which is where my parents stayed, and I stayed with them, you're thinking about it all the time and you're figuring out how to optimize it. You get it done. You're clear, and as you said, then when you write the program, you write it in the most appropriate manner, you're aware of the assumptions, very clear. In a world which is so distractible because of a variety of things that take place, this is going to be the skill that will distinguish excellence.
And it's even harder today.
Much harder.
Right.
Much harder. In a day where your excitement was, a little bit of 1 hour of Doordarshan. And the only thing you have is one another to hassle and
Right.
as forms of entertainment.
Right.
Well, you have choices that you can make which are somewhat private and easy.
Correct.
Today, when you have a device in your hand that can bombard you,
Right.
also the concept of learning, in my observation, I don't know whether it is right or wrong, has changed. Today, it is very much more utilitarian.
Right.
Because when the mode of learning when we were learning, we were always taught learn the fundamentals.
Right.
Now it is, everything is there. Just discover what you need to solve your problem.
Right.
They are two entirely different learning
Assembling the
objectives.
building blocks versus, knowing the fundamentals.
Yes, and
Understanding why
it's even questionable. Even for me, I get a little confused because if I was to, and I'm very bad at the mobile, etc. So if I was to start doing it properly, it'll take me a few days, I think. And whereas if I give it to a young kid today, about 3 minutes he will sort it and look at me, what's wrong with you?
Right.
So the mode of learning is breadth and connection,
Right.
and exactly what I need in order to get to the next point.
Right.
Some of it is very useful and powerful, it's not at all wrong.
Right.
But when you try to construct something very big,
Right.
and there, honestly, my mechanical engineering has helped me a lot.
Right.
Because as a mechanical engineer, you are taught that what you build has to stay. The joke is, if we mechanical engineers, if we write software, we will ensure that the first sparrow that sits on a bridge doesn't break the bridge. In other words, it'll be solid.
Right.
Because we think very, very deeply about this. So that's been an advantage. So a lot of it has changed.
Right.
A lot of the thinking process, the design paradigm. Today, with the emergence of a lot of the newer tools,
Right.
which can generate code, etc., a lot of the mundane has changed. It's also going to get more and more
Right.
complex and difficult.
Right. So I think there is this always push and pull between the applied computer science versus the theoretical computer science.
Yes.
On one extreme, I would say that like often within the groups of academicians, it's a debate. It's a very frequent debate, and it's unarguable that often they end up in just a race to publish more number of research papers without any meaningful outcome from them. They're just circular citations to increase the count of citations, etc. And on another extreme, you might have people so heavily focused on only the applied nature that they do not have solid fundamentals itself. So while you might be able to build few things quickly, but when you have to solve a really hard problem, you have to build something which is more than the usual, then you just get stuck. I think the answer lies somewhere in between, but would love to hear your thoughts on that. If you were to design a learning ecosystem, and on these two extremes of theoretical studies of computer science versus the applied nature, how would you strike the right balance between
Correct.
the two?
So, the concept of creating a foundation in terms of problem solving techniques, as I call it, or it could be discoveries which are academic or otherwise, they're very interesting and they must be pursued.
Yes.
And then to your point, you have the ecosystem which consumes this, which is always noisy, uncertain, unstructured, ambiguous, complex. But finally, that's where it should work.
Right.
So even we as an institute sit in the middle of these two.
Right.
So we live every day on the one side of pure research and on the other side of applied.
Right.
And the translation is one of the most difficult.
Right.
And if we have to think about it, you need to have both the skills.
Right.
You need to have skills of understanding and discerning. I actually draw a graph on two axes. On one you call it ambiguity, and another you call it materiality. And you can do the classic 4-quadrant analysis: low and high ambiguity, low and high materiality. So if you start kind of running a small antivirus in your background, in your mind, as you're discussing with people on problems from the real world space, you start looking at how is it, how material is it, how ambiguous. Ambiguous, very high ambiguity means I need to really go back to my research.
Right.
Low ambiguity means I know how to pretty much solve it. Low materiality means mundane, easy to do. High materiality means huge amount of impact. So as you start, these are not constructs that are taught to people.
And then on the top right is where highest value
Yes,
exists.
and you want to get to that.
Correct.
To the extent possible.
Correct.
And so when you think like that, then you start quickly discovering what you know and what you can do and what you don't know and what you have to apply.
Right.
And you also direct the research organization to meaningful problems.
Correct.
Because the genesis of problem solving has to come from humanity.
Right.
It cannot come outside the context of humanity or life, as I call it, not just human life, animal life, plant life. It has to come from the ecosystem of the earth or the universe. There is where you will discover challenges and problems.
Right.
Many of them will have direct applications. The other piece is, and this again equally difficult, abstractions. When you solve a problem P in a space, can you cull out from that particular problem what are the critical discovery, design, patterns, techniques, things that work that you can apply in a similar environment? So that goes the other way.
Right.
That is saying, I have a tool, I have a hammer, I look for nails. So I will go into an intense reuse mode. And I will modify this and make it a slightly stronger, multifaceted hammer which can handle all types of nail, whether it's a wood, concrete, whatever is the underlying surface, it understands how to deal with it. So these two are unfortunately very applied, constant interaction.
Correct.
In an environment where academia is separate and this world is separate, that bridge organizations like us create. We create that meaningful and cogent conversation and analysis bridge where problems from here can be introspected here, solutions from here can be brought in here, and both of them are often informed that no, both of you are doing something wrong.
Right.
And you have to say that, no, this is a very theoretical, this is going to take several years, it's not going to work. Or you've solved it in such a subsetted context in your world, there's going to be no application here. Nobody cares about it. So that dialogue is something that, to a very large extent, is to be done in society by various constructs. Organizations like us do it.
In a very generalized format, as you talk that academia versus the industry, where industry is the extreme of applied, that I only care about it if it can be sold, to put it very simply, right? And on the other hand, academia is only interested in just doing more and more research. I think it's very inefficient for our society if these two are disconnected.
Yes, it
and
is.
Unfortunately, that has happened. It's the fact of today.
Yes.
If I take a step back, and this is a problem statement, and if we also talk about the impact of this inefficiency that it has caused, you have worked across professionals, students, particularly in the domain of sales from across the world, during your time in US, in Europe, in India. How do you, and this might be of course a little bit of a sensitive thing to talk about, but what have been your observation that, like, while of course on one side our Indian talent is proven worldwide, we have CEOs of so many top tech companies who are Indians, but at the same time we often talk about that a lot of Indian youth is not skilled enough to even get employed, right? So what have been your observation in the problem solving ability, the impact ability of Indian youth, or in general Indian talent as compared to the rest of the world? And then what, in your opinion, what are the areas there where we can get better and how?
Sure. You're right, I've been working with students for a very long time, I still do. And that gap is still there. And that gap, some of the genesis of that gap is well known. It's the education system, just in terms of its manifestation. As I spoke briefly earlier, the ability to learn and the ability to teach and learn, we may need to go back to some of the older constructs. We may need to go to a slightly greater personalized styles of learning, which will help students move away from a certain amount of distraction for results into love for learning. That's a tough one. Right? Many students from other countries, we pride on the numbers that we push through the education system. They pride on the very small number, but the very high quality they push through the education system. Right. So there are solutions in both places. Right. So you want to get to the top right quadrant again. Right. You want to get the maximum number of students who have the highest amount of interest into the system. So in order to do that, the secret lies in constant validation of students from an academic world and give them apprenticeship in the real world. The quicker they can understand, because this is a very well-known statement that is often made, that it doesn't matter which university, when they come out of a college, they're not easily employable. What is that statement? That statement is a gap. That statement is fundamentally a gap, and I see it even today. It does not matter what the university, it can be the best university in India. And I ask, what is it? It is that excess focus on publications, marks, academic success.
Just passing the exams, getting the best marks.
That is a completely different goal set.
Right.
Compared to the goal set that you have in a context of
the moment you get
solving.
out of your university, no one cares.
No one cares. I joke with people, I ask people this question: what did you score in unit test 2 in mathematics in class 4?
Right.
What do you know? And then I tell them something else. I tell them that the way we have to think is, when we are in the education system, you consider yourself as walking or running.
Yeah.
When you are in the college, consider yourself as swimming. And in real life, you're told to fly.
Well, that's true.
Each is dimensionally different,
Right.
and you can pick some skills if you have some luck.
Sure, you build some strengths, you build some endurance.
But fundamentally, what is asked of you
Yeah.
is typically not taught.
Correct.
So to come back, you have to build the bridges. So
Right.
apprentice-based learning is a very good idea too. So one of the contexts which you may be aware in the Western world is, at a very early age, they force children to communicate a lot more.
Right.
And the more you communicate, the greater your ability to sharpen your thoughts.
Right.
I'll give you an example which is very real. The best way to learn is to teach,
Right.
even in our applied world.
Right.
So if there's a new topic, if somebody wants to learn, you tell them, boss, kal class lena hai tere ko, 15 logon ke samne.
Correct.
Suddenly all the
You have
learning
to be
objectives
really
are
thorough.
complete.
Yes, absolutely.
So what does that mean? It is the doing and validation in a certain larger context that gives you the assurance and confidence that you can pick up things. How do you learn?
Right.
See, and this is also, our education system must focus more on asking people to tell what are the questions, not what are the answers. This is done in a lot of the world.
Right.
This is the key to success, because when you are a CEO, nobody is going to ask you answers.
Correct.
They are asking you the questions. What are your questions?
Correct.
What is the direction that you are going to take?
Correct.
What are you going to pursue?
Correct.
What is the next technology trend?
Right.
There is no answer. It's all, you have to know the questions to ask correctly.
Right.
Is it important to focus on X or Y?
Right.
So the questions, and it's not just CEO. You can build, see, a CEO is finally several days of life. Suddenly you're given a designation.
Right.
Just because you're given a designation, you may not have the skills to execute
Right.
the job.
Right.
Yesterday I was X, today I'm Y, so I know it, is it? No. I should have built, I have another favorite. You should have been in your future designation for 1 year before you take it up.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Makes you self-assured,
self-assured,
confident.
yeah.
So these things are not typically, in a world where there's competition, expectation,
Right.
excitement.
Right.
Not so sure whether these grounded principles or even patience.
Right.
We may not have patience to go at that level.
No, I think that is also rooted in this mindset gets built because of, particularly in countries like India and China, where there's overly competitive structure of competitive exams, etc., where you are successful or failure in life because of one exam that you give on a particular day.
Correct.
So back in 1980 or 81, when you would have given your joint entrance exam for admission to
9
IIT, it was
hours.
very different.
9 hours, that's all it is.
Right.
I was lucky in
Correct.
9 hours.
Right.
There were some people who were not lucky. There were
Correct.
1,000 who were unlucky compared to one who was lucky. That's
Correct.
all.
And interestingly, I think, at least it's my belief, and I would like that belief to be true, that even someone who might not have gotten through JEE, they would have still done fantastic well in life if they had the right first principles.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think in your time it was much better. In the current time, it gets drilled into majority of those 17, 18-year-old that if you do not do well in this exam, then you are a failure for life.
Yeah, and at 12 and 13-year-olds, unfortunately, it
It
goes
even
much
goes
earlier.
much earlier. And then I think that is bound to instill this belief that I have to just get the marks in exam,
Correct.
and that makes me successful or failure in life.
Correct.
Not building the knowledge, not building
Correct.
things.
100% correct. 100% correct. In fact, one of the best, I remember vaguely, one of the best engineers who worked in the Big Three in North America was a mining engineer from Colorado.
Right.
and he was the top automotive engineer.
Right.
And that type of expression,
Correct.
socially,
Correct.
is very permissive
Correct.
in the Western world. In India, I think, but it's changing.
Of
To be
course.
very fair, it's changing.
Correct.
However, there is still that focus, and I think the converse is also very unfortunately true. There's a certain sense of entitlement when people go to these universities,
Correct.
which is also not required.
Correct.
I mean, I have seen people who've come out from top universities who are not appropriately skilled for various jobs that they do, because
So a dear
it's
friend
a
of
random
mine,
game.
no, a dear friend of mine who teaches at one of our premium institutes, one of the IITs, he said something very interesting. He mentioned that the issue that nowadays we face, that earlier, so this gentleman studied at the same institute as well. He said at our time, people who wanted to be engineers are the ones who would, want to join IIT. Today, people who want to be IITians are the ones who want to join IIT,
correct.
not the people who necessarily want to be engineers.
You are correct. You are correct.
And then it's a little bit of misaligned goals of the institute and the students. That
Very much so. No, and I have seen dime a dozen examples of students who go into the university to get the brand, not to get the education. So after having spent 4 years of doing rigorous engineering education, the moment they step out, they may join an organization that may be doing online retail sales, which has little or nothing, or even better, I've had individuals who have spent a lot of their career who will come, and when I get into a meeting, they will almost apologetically tell, I'm from ABC University, IIT, etc., but I'm not an engineer.
No, but I think behaviors are shaped by the incentives,
And
as you
over a
mentioned.
period of time, they veered away. So,
Correct.
putting it different, the reason they entered that is not for the subject,
Correct.
or even the discovery process. So that is one of the key reasons where people who join a certain profession must have the tehrav of being in that profession for a period of time.
Right.
My simple guidelines for people are, when you're 21, because it's worked for me, maybe I'm biased therefore, when you're 21, 22, don't worry about your compensation. That's the last thing you need to think about. Worry about whether you get a chance to learn. Spend 5 years learning everything that you can learn.
And fortunately, I think anyone who, of course, just being able to study engineering is a privilege in our country. And if you are that privileged, most likely you can take care of your material needs at most places.
Yes.
So it does not matter how much extra you earn on top of that.
Yes. That is societal pressure.
That's societal pressure. So you can let go of that for your long-term gains.
And that's coming. You see, also we have as a country moved away from, when I was there was still some subsistence-based, some basic questions were there. We've been moving away.
Fortunately, we have moved away from that to quite an extent.
So you can actually make choices.
Correct.
Choices of your own interest, and then go into the discovery mode. Absolutely.
Correct. So you were talking about apprenticeships as well, that apprenticeship would be a great tool to kind of create the bridge between the theory and the applied nature of the sciences, and also creates the bridge between the academia and the industry. One thing that an experiment that we did, and probably we will see the results in some time, so the people who finished their first year of fundamental education, let's say they have learned programming, they have learned problem solving, said to most of them, we said go and do an internship for a year. And see that then you can come back to the institute after that internship, after your experiences in the real world. And second thing we did was that in some of our programs we said that, as you were mentioning, that we created a group of 5. We said for this group the marks are going to be same. And you all have to collectively build. I remember I was stepping out from one of my lecture, and a student came to me and he started complaining me, sir, why don't you just take it individually? My group mates are not doing anything, and that is what you need to learn. That how do you when you are at the job, you are going to have a team of 5 or 7 people.
Correct.
And you cannot say that, okay, let me do the project alone.
Correct.
You have to work with them. You have to figure out how do you pull them up, and that's the thing to learn, not just the coding part, but also being able to work collectively. So of course, early experiments will see, of course, these are some things where the results will only be visible on a very, very long timelines. But I think some of these experiments would be pretty interesting. Coming to from the industry and policy side, because again, while in a smaller ecosystem you can run the experiments, but the impact, as you mentioned, is only when on the top right corner, when this is also happening to our millions of students, not just few hundred students in a particular institute. How do you see that evolving in our country? That because like traditionally, for example, even our education policies have been pretty, in a way, for example, they might say that only 10% of the education could be from professor of practice. Now that's pretty inefficient. But what have been your exposure on the policy and the industry side?
Understood. I think it's changing. Again, that too. There's been a much greater proliferation of institutes,
right,
where there were only 5 or 6 IITs,
right,
now it's 22, 25.
Right.
Same with AIMS, same with.
Right.
We'll have to, the challenge, as I often say, is availability of expertise,
right,
not opportunities. So
right,
actually in India today, if you look at it in a different way, we can easily accommodate 100 or 150 IITs.
This is very counterintuitive though.
The aspect though that you need to work on is to ensure that the level of education is maintained. So if I can replicate the thought and capability of people in a fast and rapid manner,
right,
with a clear focus that I need to maximize the opportunity for children,
right,
with a further clear focus that the real life opportunities are going to mirror them so that they can be gainfully employed.
right.
See, that's where it will have to finally connect up to. Whether they do their own businesses or they're employed by somebody else.
Right.
In a broader context, they're all being gainfully employed in some
the capability.
manner.
They should have capability to create impact and create value.
To do
and
some
therefore
work
be, absolutely.
in whichever construct that they want to.
Correct.
So then the basic question is there capacity in the country to absorb 10x or 50x people?
Right.
Have we addressed all the problems in the breadth and depth of our country in a multilingual context, with all the culture taken care of, with all the knowledge captured, with all the technology that can be innovatively employed across the country? How far are we? We will immediately say, no, we've got some technical guys we need. So you've got a gap.
Yeah.
If you've got a gap, how do you fill that gap?
Right.
You fill that gap because that gap fulfillment, today's success story with the various institutions in India probably were created about 30, 40 years ago.
Right.
Even more.
Right.
So if you've got to solve the problems for the next 20 to 30 years, you better break the bottleneck of large scale but quality education.
Correct.
And employability at a certain level. Because if you have to jump a bar this high, there is no need to teach a person to jump that high.
Correct.
It's good enough. A lot of the societal problems are that high only.
Right.
So you work it in a much more intelligent manner.
Correct.
And then you start working what are the types of skills required for energizing society.
Right.
How many, in a very crude sense, how many shoemakers, how many what do you need compositionally in society?
Right.
And how do you see yourself in society over the next 30 years?
Right.
And then backtrack that into the types of educational institutions. Can it deliver approximately that number with a certain quality? Do not, in my scheme, do not look at it saying, I've got 3-4 IITs and they do this quality, it'll get diluted. No.
That's not the way. Yeah.
The way you need to is go to the end problem.
Right.
It's like this, the joke that they say, when a bear is chasing you and 2 people are running, you need to just run faster than the other guy.
Yeah.
So you need to be faster than the problem. You need not be so, and a lot of it, that does not mean you need to get defocused on other research priorities that may be of tremendous value.
Right.
You can continue doing that.
Right.
Nobody is saying that.
Right.
If you want to have an agenda and do that as well.
Right.
But let that not become the only way to address. It's like a continuum rather than two discrete points.
Absolutely.
And you need to make those connections and allow society to flow through that continuum.
So in a way, the education system, the curriculum, the pedagogy, all of that we design, as of today, often that is done in a silo.
Right.
Sure, we have built this, people will graduate, they will figure out. I think instead of that, it has to be deeply driven by what is the need of the country in next 10, 20, 30 years, primarily driven through either, let's say, for-profit organizations, non-profit organizations, governmental organizations, that's in a spectrum, or even the kind of entrepreneurs that will need to be created in the coming decades.
Correct.
And then you build for that what kind of skills will create the capable human capital.
Correct. And along with that, you keep focusing on the individual because specifically in software and technology we know it, but others also have a similar aspect, but in software it absolutely is there. There used to be a book called Software Risk Management by a gentleman named Capers Jones a while ago. And in that it is documented that the productivity of a software engineer can be 1 to 25x.
We just talked
That's
about
a
10x engineers, but
huge-
that's a huge spectrum.
Huge spectrum. That is the opportunity cost for you.
Right.
So that has to also be thought through and addressed.
Correct.
And in it lies the earlier question which you asked, how do you get the levels of skill in India where instead of getting, 100 CEOs, why not think of, 50,000 CEOs?
Right.
That is, there is such a burgeoning amount of talent in India in all spaces.
Right.
That is, absolutely second to none. For that, you need to break the back of this whole thing at an individual level.
Right. Right.
With a system that supports, validates, rewards, assists, does not criticize, and the negative also is taken care of, doesn't cause social problems, doesn't place so much emphasis that people start committing suicides.
Right.
See, you need to balance that whole thinking process.
It's
in a
an
very
intelligent
ethical
operating
manner.
system. It's
That's
a very
right.
intelligent operating system.
Get that in place,
Yes.
it'll deliver the results. Then you just step back. You don't need to do anything.
Correct.
The ecosystem will sort itself out after that.
Correct. Sir, one thing that you were talking about the risk management using technology, and that reminded me of the infamous crisis of 2007 and 8. While many viewers might be young enough not to even have been through it, but some of us, while it was, I think I was in my very early 20s, you were at the forefront of it. Can you tell us about your work during the housing crisis of 2007 and 8, the global recession that caused, and then there was a slow recovery, but you played a key role in some of the things there.
Sure. See, I was lucky to be in the sector. Right. So again, this also tells you a little bit about how problem solving can take place. I joined this organization in 2002, which was associated to this in this sector. Mm-hmm. And this problem occurred in 2007, which gave me 5 years. Japanese say you need 10,000 hours to master something. I had 5 years, which is exactly the same. So I was running their entire technology portfolio, and I could see the problem coming because there were a lot of weak spots. There is an adage in risk management that if 3 independent things fail, then the system has a very high probability of failure. So if a person is in an aircraft, and if the wing falls off and the pilot has a heart attack, which are two totally unrelated, and let's say a door falls out, that means air has started entering, then there's a very high chance of a crash. So like that, I saw multiple factors taking place. A certain sentiment, a certain manifestation of that sentiment to give money where it should not have been given. Extraordinary linkages in the system which were very tight. Normally what happens is in complex systems, one of the first things you need to do is build moats. They're like, if one part burns, you need to separate the second. It was not
containment
like
of the...
So this was the second major problem. And the third was, there was a certain behavior in general in the system that was not the most appropriate. So all this caused a huge amount of, it precipitated the crisis.
Could you help us with some examples of these, the systems, the independent systems that you noticed?
So for instance, one of the things that has to happen is when you actually give a loan, an extraordinary amount of due diligence has to be done. So that's one thing that needs to be done. On the force that works in the opposite direction is the desire to make more loans. Right. In other words, to give more money to loan.
Right.
When these two are constantly at loggerheads, a person may make a decision that don't do too many checks now. Because I'm interested in getting more loans.
I want to just give more
That will
loans.
break the system by a little bit. By the same token, if what happens is that in a very efficient system that was there at the time, when money gets created by a bank in the form of when they give the loan, they all get bundled together and get sold further in the ecosystem as securitized instruments. Right. If those players do not do their due diligence in understanding what to pick up and what not to, you may get into a second level of possible failure. Saying that,
and these first and second are independent from each other.
Completely independent. And then the third is there is a rhetoric that, as a human being, you have a right to a loan. Very dangerous very dangerous social statement
Public
to make.
opinion, yeah.
And then what happens? Individuals who may not be employed, who may have large families, who may be living on, in their context, something called food stamps, that is, they don't have long-term means of meaningful subsistence. They can try and get $200,000, $500,000 loan. Unrelated problems.
3 unrelated events, but
Manifested.
all manifesting at the same time.
So when the problem took, what happens is it goes through a situation where loans default, so that becomes a huge financial burden. Institutions may fall because they are dependent and suddenly the system is fractured. So you need to quickly, the only way you can resolve it is by pushing those assets through the system and making them viable assets again. That's the only way. That's where we were involved. So we had to participate in what was called foreclosures, which is a legal process, evictions, which is to get people out, and then something called REO, which is real estate owned, which means it is temporarily owned by a third party. You have to sell it and put that whole thing back into the system. And that needs to be done quickly and efficiently and in a fair manner so that all of this goes back. Fortunately, we had been creating the technology and the ecosystem. So we ran auctions for real estate. Sitting in the backwaters of Bangalore, we would sell lots of properties very quickly because it had to go through the system.
Right.
And not small numbers. We had huge numbers. And so this started loosening the
crisis.
the flow.
Yeah.
It's a flow. And फंस गया. फंसने का निकालने का आपको निकलना शुरू हो गया. It took actually about 7-8 years. And I think I saw recently, I depend on third party information, but it may have cost the United States $15 trillion. Wow. At the time the crisis happened, I spoke to some very good professional friends of mine because I knew it will be very big. I had estimated 10 to 15 million only. I said it will be very big. They said no, 500 billion में चला जाएगा. मैंने कहा मजाक समझ के बैठे हो. इतना बड़ा problem है. And you touch the first tip, then the second tip will break. Then you need to reach a point of quiescence, calm, and then you need to build again. That took about, from 2008, 2017 or 16 or 17 is when things completely settled.
So almost a decade and $15 trillion is what it
it's
cost.
not a small amount.
Right.
It's not a small amount, and
No,
several
India's-
companies disappeared.
Yeah, it's 5-year total GDP of India today.
Correct.
So back in that time, it's probably
Huge, and then the social impact,
Right.
the whole thing. It was a very complex and a very scary situation at the time, and we saw the whole thing. I saw it happen. I kind of semi-predicted it. I could see some of the things that was happening. That was, for me, very counterintuitive from a business perspective, and I felt it was a problem. Fortunately, we were there, and fortunately, we were able to participate in the human ecosystem for recovery.
No, it's very intriguing that that this big crisis that is happening, the American empire as they call it, right, which is going through this big crisis, and a group of individuals in Bangalore are playing a critical role in resolving it.
Yes,
which is invisible in a way.
Yes, it's completely invisible, and to a very large extent, it's not wrong to be that way. The thing is, though, it's like again a certain karma, because probability of a set of guys mastering a technology for 5 years, being ready, running it, knowing it very well, participating in the ecosystem. Then I ran the businesses. I was not only running technology, I was even running some of the business elements. So it was extremely, for me, in addition to, of course, being of some use to somebody, it was tremendously valuable, because that's the other piece that is critical. We forgot to speak about this. You need to take technologists and make them do business things.
Right.
Not just remain within technology. Put some real money on their head and say that, look, boss, if you make the wrong decision, $20-30 million is going to go down.
Right.
That brings a sobering thought process. You are no longer worried about the esoteric nature of the technology. You're okay with the band-aid.
Right. You're okay with some bad code. You're
It's
okay,
okay.
with some bad
It's
design.
okay. Get me the first thing.
Right.
You balance the sense of here and now and urgency and decision making.
Right.
And you start constructing a greater amount of craftsmanship
Right.
of how to look at a problem very quickly to know what is it you need to quickly take care of
Right.
and what is it that you can have a little more time, and also drive the accountability of decisions. So it's not just building technology because it's nice, you want to get ahead of XYZ.
Right.
Finally, it has to meet a business objective, either top line or bottom line or capital.
Right.
This is the unknown aspect of
Correct.
the mortgage crisis.
Correct.
The mortgage crisis was neither top line nor bottom line. It was liquidity. It was a balance sheet problem.
Right.
It was not a P&L problem. People don't even know balance sheet problems very well. They are very worried about top line, kaisa hai, bottom line,
Bottom line.
especially when you're in the services industry,
Right.
software services.
Right.
You're not used to billions of dollars of investment management. That is a totally different ball game. How do you
Right.
service a debt?
Right.
How do you manage? Manufacturing companies are used to it, but they tend to have slower cycles.
Correct.
But if you combine a service-oriented sector with a huge capital infusion, people are not used to how to even think of such problems.
Right.
So I have an MBA in finance, so fortunately I know this kind of through even my own education background, I know it fairly well. So it helped me a tremendous amount to think this through.
Right. I think I just thought occurred to my mind that when we were talking about that there's coincidences in a way, right? That this is just a coincidence that you and your team were building deep expertise in something that could help unblock this global crisis.
Correct.
And then I think it connects back to the spirituality and karma again.
Correct, it does.
That you cannot plan things.
No. No.
There is something else which is letting
Always.
things happen. And again, we are nimitt matra.
Yes,
That-
and the quicker we accept that, we had this discussion. The only danger that people come to a naive conclusion that just because you're Nimit Matra, you don't have to do anything.
Right. So
That is not
your-
correct.
Your choice, the ability to make choice.
Free will.
So while your free will still plays a role.
Plays a
while
role.
you are just serving a bigger purpose, but you still
100%.
have the free will.
You have to do that free will correctly.
Right.
That is the whole, and that's all that there is to life. If you do execute that free will with a reasonable amount of clarity, and don't focus on the rewards and results, the larger power will take care of everything else. You don't need to overthink this through.
Right.
And it's a difficult thing for most people. For those who have discovered it, it's the easiest thing actually.
Right.
It's like you have a knowledge of something, and so you find everything to be very, very balanced. You don't worry about it. Sthita pragya. You need to be in the center of everything. Duality is a given. Good and bad, summer and winter is a given. How you react to it is all that you have in life.
Right.
Because you are going to have bad days and good days. You are going to have success and failure.
Right.
You're going to go through that whole life journey in a certain manner. So it is not the fact that it occurs, because that is karma, probability.
Right.
What you do have control over is how you react to it.
Right. Right. So taking a step back, like now this deep intellectualism and spirituality that has existed in India for thousands of years. And then on the other hand, which of course there is no doubt about it, the whole world has looked up to India and has even today looks up to India when it comes to the spirituality. And on the other side, as we were talking about, even science is a form of spirituality. But on that is something that unarguably, I think we are not there. Like if I talk about, let's say, the open AI that is getting built, it's getting built in Bay Areas. It's not in Bangalore. Or even a few decades back when Google got built, it got built in Bay Area again, not in Bangalore. What do you think? And even for that matter, even on the East, if I talk about China, however, recently have been doing pretty good work, pretty high impact, quality work when it comes to advanced technologies. Recently, we had a founder from a fairly well performing AI company from China in our campus, and he was talking about that what are the things that are happening there in their universities, in their industry. And I would agree as a programmer myself, as a technologist myself, we are a little behind. Maybe little with a pinch of salt, we are quite a bit behind. In your opinion, how do we get back to a position where we are leaders in this new age intellectualism, which is rooted in technology?
I think there are a few things that we must do. There's the more difficult thing, which I will come to in a moment. but there's a much simpler thing that we can do. And I know this is can be a little bit, again, may not be the correct thing to say, but I will say it. We need to not look at anybody else other than ourselves for problem solving. Even in our institute, one of the stances that we have taken is we do AI work in India for public good, social good. We minimize the influence of anybody else other than the individuals involved in working. कबड्डी अगर खेलना है ना तो मैदान में उतरो.
और प्लेयर्स को डिसाइड करना होगा कैसे खेलना है.
बस बाहर से कमेंट्री नहीं चाहिए.
Right.
I don't want a single person commenting on what is it we must do.
Right.
If you want to play, come to the field.
Right.
Now, ideologically what this means is we must stop looking to others for solutions.
Yeah.
Once you do that, it starts getting a certain amount of backbone self-reliance that you start building. Not from manufacturing, and those are all manifestations.
Right.
From thinking.
Right.
The way you think. So if you're given a problem, are you going to quickly go to Google and start looking for a solution, or are you going to start thinking about it all alone?
Right.
That is one part of the problem. The second, which is a little more difficult, of course, to do, is the discovery of the past that we have in India, for which there is a obvious challenge which we have to. I'm also guilty of being a problem in this, which is I don't know Sanskrit. How can I teach you maths if you don't know numbers?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that all solutions exist in X or Y, but if you do not even know the language in which it is described, you have no chance to win it, no?
You have no chance to. You can't even begin exploring.
End of story.
Yeah.
So, to a very large extent, the larger problem over a period of time, what happens is the larger problem of that, we kind of sideline it because we have got this distinction between science and spirituality. Or we feel, Sanskrit and all is totally different. What is this? There's no science behind it. Chhod do.
Yeah.
It's science mein karo, mathematics karo, integral karo, chalo jaldi karo. E raised to ye wo, start solving problems, physics, chemistry, maths, Jacobian nikalo. ये वो करते रहो जिंदगी में. वो जब तक हम वो people who transcend that, and I'm certainly not one of them, are very, very few people. It's not mainstream.
Right.
Until you can get a mainstream discussion, dialogue, and an ideological belief that this has nothing to do with any religion, it has something to do with pure knowledge of humanity constructed for several thousands of years that has more mining ability. I remember I spoke once to a person who was the CEO of a storage company, and so he was saying his top line is growing so much. So I asked him a question. I asked him how much of this is unique information on the internet. He said, what are you doing? Destroying my business model? Everything is copy.
It's just a copy of something.
So whereas this world is undiscovered, pure creativity, but difficult because we don't know the language, we don't have a large scale, validated, endorsed, socially endorsed system. You must have a socially endorsed system. No, this guy is doing this work, he's a great guy.
Correct.
Versus this guy is working in XYZ company in Bangalore, earning A amount of money in B flat with C car.
Right.
Well, those things socially we need to start getting them out. Then these problems are easier to solve. So some pioneers will go. There are efforts to try and build a equivalent system in India but that will take time. Plus, the beauty of India lies in its diversity and its independence. In as much as we can critique it, it's also very important for us to be that way. It is important for us to express ourselves in every part of India exactly like the way we want. It is the system that should accommodate it, not the other way around. The system should recognize the differences that we have as human beings and celebrate it, and not force us to start doing some Englishish messages in various social media tools. That's not the way to deal with it. You've got to be able to celebrate it for who we are, because if we don't, we will lose a lot of who we are. In fact, I was at a UN conference and one of the major discussions was, what do we do about languages that are being lost?
Yeah, and there are many in India.
Many in India, many in the world, many in India, many in India, many dialects, many languages. So how do you get that? Those are difficult problems and difficult. We
Difficult
are
and
actually working in
complex.
one or two areas like that as well to preserve culture, etc. Because it's very important.
Right, right. Coming to one more section that I want to touch upon, which is connected to the preservation of languages that your team is working on. So while AI has been the buzzword last few years, there is a lot of skepticism, fear as well. I think it's kind of those stages of phases of any new technology that it goes through. That earlier there was ignorance for probably last few decades. Then there is speculation, and then there is fear, and then there will be eventual adoption. Most conversation on AI are mostly, like, if I just talk about last 6 months or so, are mostly about that how many jobs it might eat out, right? And technology is something that you cannot stop it. It's coming, it will come, it has to come. Rather, the entire ecosystem will adapt to it. At Wadhwani AI, you have been leading a lot of AI first initiatives for social impact, right? So generally, most people approach the new things happening AI with certain fear that it's just going to take away a lot of jobs, but at the same time it comes with so much positive impact. If you could talk about some of the large impact initiatives that your team has led, and particularly you work on a lot of domains which are otherwise ignored, the very grassroots impact on the lives of people. So if you could tell us a little bit about
Sure.
that.
So the concept of jobs being lost, I've heard from 80s when EDP, electronic data processing, EDP came in.
Right.
I don't think any jobs have been kind of dramatic.
Rather they multiplied by huge.
So the pie has to be increased.
Pie has to increase.
Human endeavor, I go slightly differently. Why not work on typewriter? That'll create a lot of jobs.
All the typists lost their job though.
Yeah. So they needed to morph themselves to a different skill set and do it gently.
Correct.
Education systems, certain professions will go away over a period of time and get displaced by others.
Right.
That is going to happen. That
So
we
if
will
I
not.
articulate in that way, that the typists didn't really become jobless.
They
The typists
typed on a different
They
device.
typed on a different device.
That's it.
So as long as you are willing to do that,
That's right.
probably there are bigger opportunities for you.
Yes, they didn't need whitener,
Correct.
and the penalty of an error was much lower, but their speed of typing was, and they were taught many other tools. So if we were to look at it that way, then it's very exciting. As an institute, we work with farmers. So we have one solution that we ran for 4 years. Now it's getting integrated into national framework. The crop of cotton has a couple of pests called the pink and American bollworm, and that can completely destroy the pest. So traditionally what the farmer would do was they would, and the way this gets trapped based upon scientific research done in the field of agriculture, is you've got to put a trap in a farm, and at a very early age, those pests, they get attracted to a certain smell. So by putting that sticky trap, they go in, they get caught in that. And then the farmer will take it out, and it'll have all kinds of things. It'll have leaves, dirt, this, that, and then they have to somehow determine what the interpretation of that particular number of pests is. So they would
Interestingly, this was used in a very recent Bollywood movie.
Okay.
I'm not recalling the name. I think Stree.
Oh.
In the latest version of Stree, this thing was used that the
Oh, I
lady
didn't know
puts
that.
that sticky trap in the
Oh.
farm, and the pests get attracted to
Okay.
that.
We've been running it for 4 years, so somebody may have seen it. But then they have to go to the Agriculture Institute, they get the advice. Maybe it takes a couple of days for them to sort things out. But those 2-3 days are critical, especially if there's an infestation. So what we've done is we've told them just take it on any contrasting surface, take a quick picture. We will tell you everything about it. Right there, and then we'll tell you what is the generic pesticide you must apply based on a concept called economic threshold level, again decided by either local authorities or the government. And then tell them, no, don't worry about it, or no, come back again and monitor it. So we've run it over 1 lakh farmers across 10 states. And this in India, if you run anything, it has to be multilingual. And it has to be very user intuitive. So we ran this. So this has been a huge program that we ran for a period of time. Now we are giving it to the government, and they will run it in the future. Another one, which is quite interesting, again scaled up, is for a specific state, one of the states, Gujarat, where we've run a program called oral reading fluency. It's a fundamental skill, foundation skill for children to be able to read well. If you read well, chances are you learn well, and the pace at which you will augment your learning will be very, very good. Now in India there are always challenges in reading, and in a teacher-led system this can be quite difficult to run evaluation of all of this.
Right.
So the ORF, or the oral reading fluency, gives us brief paragraph. Child reads it into a mobile phone. The AI tells which are the words they've read correctly, which are the ones they've missed out, where the pauses are correct, what is the problem that they're having. It scores them and integrates it into the entire learning platform for the state. So millions of students now, they go through the normal rigorous cycle. So that's only stage one. Stage two is remediation that we are starting now. We recently, by the way, won a grant, a worldwide grant with Meta. We came number one actually in the world, across 70 countries. We won the grant for this work, for the future. We have done it to a certain level, they want to participate in the future. So as an institute we do this. We won an earlier grant in the cotton, we won it with H&M Foundation. Again, there 20,000 people applied, we came for the first. So we apply for these. The reason we do this grant application and worldwide is because we feel that that also establishes our stature and repute, and a lot of backing comes in the endorsement of the solution. So ORF is another example where you're working with students and teachers, again ground.
And
ground
here
level.
I'm assuming that this would be again multilingual, helping
Yes,
people.
in this case it's a specific language. We do it in Gujarati and English, and then and Hindi and English, and then we'll roll it across pan India. So each of them will be multilingual. There's another solution where in the world of TB we have several solutions. One of them analyzes a lab test result called LPA, line probe assay, and provides it to make the life of a lab technician easy. So there you can say, oh, lab technician will not have a job. No, they do 4 lakh tests, they can do 10 lakh tests. And if they do 10 lakh tests, there's a greater chance they will catch TB patients. There is a TB Mukt Bharat, NTEP, National TB Elimination Program, that is launched at the country level by the Prime Minister as well as by the Central TB Division. So there's a lot of push to try and eliminate TB. Every tool there is of use.
Right.
So there's another classic AI problem where if a patient comes in for the first time into a TB facility, we need to predict whether the person will take medication properly or not. Sounds like an innocuous problem.
The DOTS program that they had started
The
long
DOTS, but yes, the DOTS program has now gone into this thing called prevent adverse TB outcomes.
Got it.
So if you focus the resources, the DOTS was to the enforcement. Here it's a prediction. Who do you focus on? You don't need to focus on a bunch of people who have taken care of themselves. You need to focus on a small number. If you focus on that number, adverse outcomes are limited, multi-drug resistant TB is limited, mortality is reduced, spread of disease is reduced. Again, this is now rolled out across 12 states, pan-India. Everything we do, our goal is pan-India.
Right.
One of the thinking processes, again, this goes back to some of our earlier discussion, is we try and think of our problems always. We are not, AI is there, but it's just a tool for us.
It's not the answer, it's not the goal.
No.
The goal is solving the problem.
Yes. So, and there too, we try to think of the goal saying deployment first.
Right.
Know the deployment of the solution before you start designing the solution. A lot of even corporate customers, they design the solution for its brilliance.
Right.
And then they see, where am I supposed to use it?
Right.
For us, when you're working in the social sector, that is not the way you will succeed. Right. So that's one design principle. Another design principle is, if you are working, I call it India and Bharat. India is the urban India,
That's us,
well-educated,
people in
all of
school,
us. Bharat is people who are holding the smartphone for the first time often in their life. So the application for them has to be designed differently.
Right.
So the responsibility of outcomes is a little more on the provider,
Right.
not on, you cannot have this concept of they did it, they were independent. So it's a more prescriptive rather than a feature-rich application.
Right.
So the next step is told by the system and not by the user. So that's a totally, and this again goes down to all the education things.
Correct.
People don't think like this.
Right.
They're used to a requirements document that comes from somebody who tells me, no.
Right.
Look quickly to see what is the core problem.
Right.
So our user design research team sits down, they actually live with farmers. They find out, when do you get up in the morning? When do you go to your farm? What is your rhythm? What do you understand? Or when people, we work with ASHA workers. There's a solution where we take a 5-second video of a baby, 5 to 10-second video, and we predict the critical parameters of the baby, including its weight, length, chest circumference, head circumference, and arm circumference. already this is one of the most complex problems we were working on because it's very difficult to solve this. You're determining the weight of a baby based on
Just
a
by the
5-second
image.
video. So it's very difficult. We have now solved it to a very high degree of adoptable efficacy. And it started rolling out systematically to states. There you need to know how ASHA workers are, what they do, how they live. Earlier they were carrying a spring balance. Now they don't need to carry any of that. They're very excited. Otherwise they would write it in register. Now they don't need to do. They just take the video, upload it. Everything is done.
And it's very interesting that how much impact these technological interventions can drive.
Yes.
That now, I think probably a few years back, it would be a pretty difficult task to even ensure that every ASHA worker has a balance.
Correct.
Because that's a logistical nightmare.
And the error in the balance, the weather parameters,
The maintenance of it, and
weather parameters, ability for somebody to service it well.
Right.
These we need to move
Right.
these props
Right.
to available technologies, which should now be more mature and be acting as props. Again, it's a karma moment. Everything has to come together.
Right.
You need to have a large scale wireless network.
Right.
You need to have the investment of standard smartphones in society.
Right.
You need to have a society that is taught using social media how to use these technologies. So we didn't spend time training. We just leveraged what people already knew. We just have to piggyback on
Right.
the available cognitive advantage now that is available in the population that is using it.
Right. And that's a lot of design thinking as well.
Very
That what
much.
are the opportunities exist that you can very efficiently leverage?
All of this. So my other statement, we are not constrained by opportunity. We are constrained by expertise.
Right.
There's tons, and AI by its very definition is about small mini opportunities you'll find. Like we have a project which won the best award by the government of Rajasthan called Silicosis. They won the award and richly they deserve it. For silicosis, and there what it is to determine a lung disease, and ideally to determine it at a very low cost. So we would even take the photograph of an X-ray because that is 0 rupees. If you have to take an X-ray, it's 100 rupees.
Right.
So what is your problem statement? It is not interpreting an X-ray. It is interpreting the photograph of an X-ray. How will you determine that? Not by sitting inside a lab, but by looking at what's going on. What is the human pain point that you're looking at? So each of these, and we are at early stages, by the way. We are fairly good at it. We are one of the, we are the largest institute of its kind in the world, if you will. We have 200 people, multi-dimensional teams. We've got user design research, measurement specialists, engineering teams, AI specialists, domain specialists, so doctors, this, that, and solution specialists. And we sit with the government, we sit down with them and solve these problems. So this is a totally new way of solving problems using technology where you directly reach technology to the end user as quickly as possible.
Right.
The other reason we approach our projects this way is because of its fundamentals of AI. Always you can generally assume that you will not get data from all over your population that you are going to deploy in.
Right.
Not possible.
Right.
You will get it from a very small subset. So then and AI principles suggest that it learns a lot more when you go to the population. So then the natural question is, how much time do you want to spend on 0.2% of the population when you know you got to anyway traverse the distance?
Right.
So the new aspects that we are teaching people and we are trying to explain is AI is all about post-deployment. AI is not about development.
Right.
What you develop is the first model and it is very useful.
Right.
Then as you go through the real life conditions of usage, of data drift, of complexities, that's when your solution will emerge.
Right.
Therefore, it's got a long tail, we call it.
Correct.
As against rule-based software, you release it, it's done.
Right.
That's another learning process that people have because the ecosystem doesn't understand this very well.
The engineers don't understand because generally we are so accustomed to, as an engineer, that here are a set of 100 test cases. If my software passes it, I'm good. But in the world of AI, where it's a non-deterministic system, the response it's going to give is not defined by a set of test cases.
Correct.
Then how do you even test it? How do you even say that the software you have built is really working?
Correct. And that's a difficult thing. That's a difficult thing. So you need to, there's experimentation and a lot of data related analysis that over a period of time, the whole LLM has proven it. The volume of data, if it reaches a certain threshold level, then you can expect a certain stabilization of its performance. And then added techniques of having a large corpus of information, you can take a small delta and leverage that
Right.
and then solve problems. That is going to be the way of the future for a lot of problems.
Right.
It doesn't matter if it's text or images or sound or whatever. You've got a corpus, and which is already created by academia and others, large tech, and then that doesn't directly solve a problem, because you need to take that and contextualize it for the problem at hand,
Right.
where the amount of information in its problem is going to be very small.
Right.
So how do you make this large behemoth meaningful for the small problem that you have? This is the problem statement of AI for the next 2 to 3 years.
Right.
And doing it well in the social sector will turbocharge the social sector.
Right.
It will release inefficiencies. It will make things a little faster. It will allow the linkages to come. Then people will sit back and see, hey, you know what? These guys have 75 band-aids. Let's look at a larger system that will emerge.
Right.
The data will come. Systems will be integrated. You have to go through this pain process.
Correct.
Otherwise, if you do top-down and just describe something, the adoption and realization by people, you will hit the roadblock at that time.
Correct.
You will do beautifully until you come to the very last stage, and then you will find resistance.
Correct.
So you are going to get that resistance.
Correct.
So where you get it is your question.
Correct. No, so on the non-deterministic systems and being able to validate that it is behaving the way it is validating, recently we discovered this thing that like one technique that we tried using was that you can have, so one system that we were building similar to the language proficiency systems that you built was in the context of technology teaching, that there is a companion who can converse with you, ask you questions, ask you follow-up questions, gives you a hint, and help you build a new concept. Now, whether this companion is interacting in the right way or not, we set up another LLM which just takes in all these interactions and rates them.
Correct.
Now, if there are 10,000 such interactions that have happened, then it will give a certain rating to them, and then we'll see that through our optimizations, is that rating increasing or not, where we have certain confidence that the ratings given by these systems are okayish.
Correct.
So it's a new kind of testing paradigm that is emerging in the software.
You know,
industry.
you may be aware, it takes a leap from a real life situation. If you go to these large thematic entertainment parks in the world, very big ones,
The Disney and
etc. You've got two cities.
Right.
One that's running on top, where people are saying, and one that runs below, that runs the top.
Right.
So in your example, you've got the top where people are interacting.
Right.
And you've got the system below, which is introspecting and constantly taking data and seeing, is this interaction meaningful? Where are the bottlenecks? Where is the crowd a little more?
Correct.
What do I need to interpret? Even from a learning perspective, Howard Gardner had once said there are 9 forms of learning. Kinesthetic, verbal, spatial, nature, the analytic. We only do 1. So even if we do very well, we are 11 on 100.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So the different forms of learning appeal to different people. And when you have a learning platform, you can have the website as the top.
Right.
And you can have the instrumentation behind as the bottom.
Right.
And the instrumentation, if done very intelligently, see, finally there is a human interaction.
Right.
And if you can capture that human at the right time, see, all of us know this, but we don't use it as effectively. At the right time, the right message with the right incentive causes the right action.
Absolutely.
We are constantly struggling to solve it in piecemeal.
Right.
Tons of information in the form of a beautiful graph. So what?
Right.
You have to contextualize it so that that individual, especially in a learning context as a student, does something.
Just the right message at the right time.
With the right
tonality.
motivation also.
Right.
Yeah. There is the whole concept of Sugato, I think Bhakti, that's the name if I've got it right. He did a huge amount of research on encouragement being the principles of learning. And he ran hole in the wall. It's a very interesting thing that you may want to see, where he put a PC in a remote village in Tamil Nadu. And this is pre-internetish kind of times, but it had content, which was biology content. And the kids in the village who were very young, they learnt biology to take an A-level course in England.
Oh wow.
By themselves.
By just that one computer in the
That's
wall.
it. And when he came back, they complained to him saying that the computer is a little slow. And there was one person in the village who was a BSc, and the only instruction that individual was given was, don't participate. Whatever they tell you, tell them very good. just encourage them.
Right.
And I think they have it even in some other place called Grannies on the Cloud, where they run a program just to encourage people.
Right.
So learning and the right type and tone of encouragement has a huge advantage.
So interestingly, most of us often mention that sometime in our life we would have one conversation with someone which changes the trajectory. Recently, we saw certain instances where that word or that sentence came from AI.
Yes.
Where the individual said that, at that time it said something to me which kind of motivated me to do something. While this is just few months since we have been experimenting with these.
Correct.
But it's very, very interesting that how these AI systems are evolving.
Yes, they're also very dangerous.
It's
in some
scary
manner.
as well. It's scary at the same time.
It's scary. The scariness is, when there is for some reason, even this is even proven to a certain extent, now things are changing. But the doctor, if the doctor is told 95% AI accuracy, 70% your expert accuracy, they'll say, no, we'll go to experts.
Right.
There is still the concept of that human touch.
Right.
And there's an enormous amount of information that gets transmitted and that is not codified.
Right.
Now, that codification is happening.
Right.
Because emotions are codified, picture is codified, movement is codified, data is codified, text is codified. So the multimodal AI, as it is able to take in a massive thing, that's still a ways away.
Right.
But in the absence of that, a very quick, it's the same blink moment, no? That if you understand, in a blink of an eye, you either like or dislike a person.
Right.
And if you understand the way human brain works, it works on primal instincts. It works on flight or fight only. So after that, the frontal cortex starts rationalizing the decision. So this is actually the rationalizing device.
Right.
It's not the deciding device in most instances. So if you accept that, then to your point, we like somebody immediately, or we're in the same message. If it is told by somebody else, we will not listen.
Correct.
Parents struggle with it all the time. They want friends to tell their children what to do.
Correct.
So it's all standard things, but it's evolving. I think it's social. So that's again the point. Holistic constructs are difficult to fathom.
Right.
Or our cognitive ability, we lack the bandwidth, or we are biased as human beings.
Correct.
We have belief structures which will exclude a lot of the thinking process
Right.
and go to a different position in life or a point of conclusion in life.
Right.
They are the difficult problems of society.
And to some extent, probably our biases are also useful sometimes.
Useful.
Because there are patterns that have gotten developed
Absolutely.
over
Yes,
years.
very much so. The danger is to be conscious of your biases.
Right.
If you're conscious of anything you do,
Right.
which again goes back to tremendously self-aware.
Correct.
But often when we are doing, and it's particularly dangerous for successful people.
Right.
Because when you succeed, then there's nothing more. You just get hugely validated.
Right.
And then your ability to kind of listen,
Right.
it goes down
drops
dramatically.
Just some time back, me and my partner Anshuman, we were meeting a gentleman who is one of the most successful people in the country. And after that, we just conversing that, of course, the wisdom, the intelligence, the smarts is so much, but at the same time, the arrogance.
Oh yeah, oh my God. Yeah.
But our articulation was that, when someone has been so successful for 40, 50 years of their life, that's the curse of it.
That is the curse of it.
It could happen to anyone, most likely.
Anyone, and that, again, there is where spirituality helps a lot.
Right.
It grounds you. If you recognize it's 80 years, then there's nothing much to say after that.
Right.
What else can you say? आप क्या उखाड़ेंगे जो कोई और नहीं उखाड़ रहा है आपके आंखों के सामने यार? वही करोगे जो और करता है. हम वही खाना खाते हैं. Where basic subsistence is the same, basic clothing, basic XYZ. It's all. So you get that basic. Then you are all in a your own 6 inches space here is what you're living the rest of your life in. In the mortgage crisis, when we were having that, I was challenged on 2 counts. I was somewhat challenged on the technology count, but I had solved it to a very large extent. Like I said, I was running the business as well. There I was challenged. It was complex and difficult. So I took a I call them kids. I took a bunch of kids from IIM and related institutions and ran them through literally a Gurukul style program. They would sit just outside my office. Literally, I could reach out and touch them every day. And one of the reasons I ran that program is to get them away from what was at that time, and I don't know whether it goes on today as well, traditionally the success factor of MBAs, which is, presentations and Excel spreadsheets. I wanted them to do real work. So I literally would challenge them, and they were very, very good in complying and then learning, and I think they're all very successful. So I would make them do things that normally you don't expect individuals who got a very advanced degree from the leading management institute in India to do, which is sit down and talk to people. You will do 100 interviews or 200 interviews. You will connect with human beings. You will be very frustrated all day long. Right. Go through those emotions. Right. You will not get beautiful graphs that you can abstract using a level of intellect, multiply, subtract, add, divide, and show it to a set of people. That is not called work. Right. Even their designation was BOM, Business Operations Manager. Right. Operations, I wanted to include them. I wanted to say, you're going to work. Right. And they did. So they had these massive complex systems. And they would say, boss, यहाँ थोड़ा change करना है तो करो, डर लग रहा है, अच्छी बात है, लेकिन करो, right. करो. Right. So they learned how to do. Right. And the experience of doing, and then I would have them build teams and build controls and do fantastic. For me, if you were to ask me to do just one thing in my life, I would help people succeed. That is, I would teach them things which lets them discover themselves. I don't want to do a second thing in life.
So in management education, if you talk about this cohort that you ran in your business operations management, if I may call it, say, a coaching for them. So participants of that cohort, first I'm just curious, where are they today?
Some of them are done extraordinarily well. One of them actually runs one of the largest, and it's funny because I displaced them from their areas of comfort. So this one kid was from IMT Ghaziabad, not a programmer, but brilliant in visualization and conceptualization. So I told him to programming seek. Bola kahan? So I told him, Dekh, let's start. We started with Unix, regular expressions. Today, he runs one of the second largest site in the world for analytics on the stock market, best known. Wow. And he's probably among the top 3 R programmers in the world. And he loves it. He says, this is what I love to do. And this is what I found myself, and hopefully he's, I think, making a lot of his financial objectives have been met. But more important than that, he's found a space for himself. Right. Like that, and so that's, I keep showing water, and then some people come and drink it, and some people don't. Right. And they'll drink it to the extent at which their own ambitions or personal desires may be driving them. Right. But I like to, Mirko, even in this institute, I like to create a mahal of where, I keep emphasizing that 2 things. One, you're in a toy shop, so play with the toys. It's a huge learning opportunity.
Curiosity, just explore.
Just do, and don't worry, just do. And second, don't constrain yourself to the things that you've learnt in life. Because what you've learnt in life is an entire accident. You didn't determine why you wanted to learn what you wanted to learn in life. The reason I am a mechanical engineer is because in my class 12, I did very well, all the nice stuff. I got into AIMS and AFMC and IIT. I was scared of the injection needle. So I went to my mother and said, मेरे को डर लगता है. बोला चल तू छोड़. सब लोग engineers हैं, तू भी बन जा.
How different life would have been if you had ended up in AFMC, for example.
I would have loved it. Because I like connecting with people and I like helping people. So that, fortunately, opportunity exists in every single profession. Correct. There's not a single thing that you do. I would be happy, being a cobbler. Really, it doesn't matter to me. I have no notion or ego about myself that I must only do X or Y. In fact, these designations I carry it's not a burden, but I would rather just be known as a human being rather than, have this. Then other people start expecting behaviors from you, and you are expected, and I cannot do that. So I'm just simple. I came by bus today, so that's all I can do.
Right. So coming to your leadership principles, right? That in the management, then another thing that comes in is that what is the leadership style? What are the core principles of leadership? Often, as leaders, there is fear of being disliked. You have to take decisions that might not be well appreciated by everyone. So, what are your core leadership principles that you follow, or you guide your mentees, if I may call them?
Sure.
To follow?
So the leadership too is a very contrived subject.
Right.
So there's some words I tend not to use in my institute. I don't use strategy. I don't use leadership. I use operating words.
Right.
So I tell people, boss, इससे डर लगता है, because जैसे ये बोलते हैं लगता है इंसान से थोड़ा ऊपर बन गया हम लोग.
कि कुछ वो layers create हो रही हैं.
हाँ, layers create हो रहे हैं.
Right.
So even people create leadership team,
Right.
and it's all matters where you get a certain stature, and then it's all artificial. Right. You have to work in a natural rhythm.
Right.
And you have to grow in a natural rhythm. Now, I was very, very lucky when I went through my management education, and I did it at the university in the US, where I had one of the top professors teach me leadership. And brilliant. He was a Harvard prof, but one of the most influential persons just in terms of opening the mind out. So he taught us 4 frames of leadership. So structural is what we are used to. Logical thinking is structural.
Right.
A, then B, then C.
Right.
What is this? Second is human resource, people oriented. Boss kar do na kaam.
Right.
Third is political. And the moment we hear political, we have negative connotations. It's not that. Political means connections, negotiations.
Getting things done by influence.
By influence.
Right.
And through connections.
Right.
And the fourth is symbolic. I want the city to be clean. I may not do it myself, but there's a symbolism associated with it. The Dandi March, the Make Salt in India.
Right.
The start is symbolism.
Right.
It's at the highest levels. So the beauty is all human ecosystems have all 4 of this playing all the time.
Right. So if I just reiterate, you said the first layer is logical, structural or logical.
People oriented.
Right.
Political and symbolic.
And the symbolism.
And it happens all the time. So to think of the same problem multidimensionally at the same time. So I think he used the concept of jungle, theater, and 2 other terms which I forget. Machine and one other term. That is, the metaphors of all 4 are there all the time. As a leader, we tend to be biased based upon our education only in one. And then we get completely messed up. Because we are looking for a logical answer for a person problem.
Right.
Or we are looking for a person answer for a negotiation problem.
Yeah.
And you're fighting the wrong battle all the time.
Right.
Because of your inadequacy of tool sets.
Right.
This, in my observation, is the most evolved and relatively simple construct of applied leadership. And then the second piece, which is again by an author who wrote about it, saying managers, not MBAs. It's Mintzberg, he's a Canadian author. He taught me, he formalized it. I was doing it, but he formalized it nicely, which is the science, art, and craft of doing. The best example is to make a pot at a potter's wheel. We can discuss the composition of material science. We can discuss what is the beautiful pot we want to make, art. But when you do it, is the craft.
Right.
And the interplay of all 3
Right.
in human ecosystems, again I call it human ecosystems, where I love being designation-less for one reason. It places the power of convincing others on me.
Right.
That's a much better position to be in, and it allows the interaction to be far more stable compared to an asymmetric power position. Because that causes truth to not come out.
Right.
It causes ego to act as barrier. It causes all the dysfunctionality that we take as granted, but which manifests itself a little later. Scott Adams is one of my favorite books. Dilbert and its associated characters are favorites. Because they actually are truths.
Correct.
They're very great truths which are very obvious. Like if you're delayed in a project, somebody will ask you to do more status reporting. Boss, I'm already busy. So these are all standard. We fall in the traps. And there's a lot of literature, by the way, on this subject, where even the top universities of the world have commented how one of them actually said, I won't name the university, but they very nicely said, we teach people how to get to the top. We don't tell them what to do when they're at the top.
I think this was from Harvard, if I remember correctly.
But it's so true.
Right.
The skills you need to go to the top are completely different than the skills you need to run something in a certain manner.
Right.
And that's where my leadership, or so-called, I won't even call it leadership, my approach to human ecosystem stems from that. I'm very comfortable, and I in fact quite enjoy it when there's debate at all levels.
Right.
Because if you are focused on problem solving,
Right.
you're looking for every angle you get to solve the problem,
Right.
rather than sanitize it
Right.
into a neat form. Because a lot of the management that, or the oversight that takes place occurs through transformation of reality to acceptable forms for senior people,
Right.
which distorts the reality.
Right.
It's like this, if you put a measurement device in something, it straight away distorts it.
Right.
But this is a little more stronger than that.
Right.
This is an ecosystem that has been constructed, sometimes willfully, sometimes unintentionally, to take information and to make it palatable. My job depends on it, my promotion depends on it.
Right.
If you remove all that, then chances are you'll get a different answer in most problems.
I think it's even more relevant in the complex environments that you are operating in.
Absolutely.
So unlike, let's say, just a B2B SaaS product,
Correct.
when you have to operate at Bharat scale,
Right.
you have built a solution, but a product manager might be only trying to solve it, that whether it is logically right steps or not.
Correct.
But the reason people are not using it is something more of their something rooted in
Correct.
symbolism or
Correct.
human things or the politics.
Correct. And I can give you a positive example of that when we did the cotton pest. So we were excited and all that. And when we described it to them, the individuals who went there were more interested in discussing the ML related matters. कि देखिए हमने बहुत ज़्यादा precision लेके आए हैं, अच्छी तरह solve किया है, ये है वो है. Counterparty, farmer tells us, ये सब हमें समझ में नहीं आता है, लेकिन एक चीज़ समझ में आता है, आपने हमारे बारे में सोचा. That's it.
Right.
This guy is stunned because they are carrying a whole boatload of information, knowledge that they want to decant on the counterparty.
Right.
And the counterparty has checkmated you with one statement, very simply,
Right.
and said, look, this is about trust.
Right.
This is about care.
Right.
And you cared and we're happy.
Right.
So then the entire onus is on us again.
Yeah.
We have to care about their caring about us.
Correct.
These notions are not very easy to inculcate because otherwise you think social, you think it's a soft. No, it's got lots of interconnected things that you've got to think about all the time, which is why it's a very difficult, complex environment.
Correct.
You correctly said it. The complexity is in its very composition.
Right.
It has nothing to do with anything else. Therefore, the institute, we're very lucky to have people who kind of more and more understand, because this is not a ready-made workforce we get.
Right.
Because otherwise, you have to build this workforce yourself.
Right.
You have to build the ideology and the thinking process.
Right. I would then love to touch upon what are the kind of people in your team who you think thrive, let's say someone who wants to really work in a cutting edge space of AI and also drive a lot of impact. What kind of people you think fits best in Wadhwani AI?
Fair. So the first statement, I interview 100% of the employees. And the reason I do it is for precisely the reason that I need to make sure that they have an opportunity to succeed. The way I have modeled it is, who is taking the risk? The employees. The prospective employees taking the risk. The institute is good, bad or ugly, whatever it is. If we have 200 people and one person is walking in, it's the 201st person who's taking the risk.
Right.
So the way I model the conversation with the prospective employees, look boss, I will tell you what we are. And we can interview you for next 25 hours and we will still not know anything about who you are, but you know it.
Right.
So what do we need from you? One, you will not complain. If you're a person who likes to find excuses, don't join.
Right.
So my whole interview is dissuading the person from joining, not selecting the person.
Yeah.
Not because of their personal characteristics, but to tell them, boss, इतना मुश्किल है, इतना difficult है, तुम क्यों आना चाहते हो ये जगह में? उसके बाद भी आए तो ठीक है, आ जाओ यार, अभी क्या करें, आप ही ने फिर डिसीजन लिया है। और उसमें ये 3-4 ही फंडामेंटल्स है। एक, आप कंप्लेन नहीं कर सकते। 2, आपको रोज सीखना है। अगर आप अपने आप को 1 साल बाद देखोगे, if you want to look at yourself a year from today, you have to look at yourself, say, you know what, I learned a ton here. If you don't feel like that, if you do, opportunities we will provide. Initiative is yours. We are a self-starter. We will not constantly remind you.
Right.
There are some areas we will remind you,
right.
but as a core, we want you to
right.
want to work here.
Right.
We are not worried about what you know. That is okay. We are very respectful. We are very excited.
Right.
We are wanting you to be sure about what you don't know and aspire to learn it.
Right.
And don't worry. Nobody is going to criticize you
Right.
about what you don't know. Nobody is going to haul you. We are all available to you in order to go through that journey.
Right.
Some people love it, and some people don't. We have a 4-word culture, which is serve, learn, care, communicate. That's it.
Right. I think pretty well distilled.
And that's it. Nothing else we want.
Right.
करो.
Right.
आप किसी को मिलते हो उनसे टॉक डाउन मत करो. थोड़ा बहुत ये जानते हो तो उससे क्यों उल्टा सीधा बात करते हो यार? उसके जिंदगी के बारे में आप क्या जानते हो?
Right.
उसकी मुश्किलात आप क्या जानते हो? आप प्यार से बात करो ना लोगों से.
Right.
एक सर्विस एटीट्यूड लोगों को 1 सेकंड में समझ में आ जाएगा कि आर यू देयर टू हेल्प देम और आर यू देयर टू टॉक डाउन टू देम. दिस इज अ 1 second मैटर.
Right.
However brilliant you are, if they come to the conclusion you're not there to help them, game is over.
Right. Right.
So we try and teach them very earthy things.
As you mentioned, that's what those farmers said.
That's what the farmer said.
We are happy that you care.
That's it. What more of a open heart, trust oriented handshake do you want from that person? Yeah. The rest is your problem. तुम क्या करते हो, कैसे करते हो, ईमानदारी से बात कीजिए.
CNN लगा रहे हो, RNN लगा रहे हो, no one cares.
Right.
Right. No, fantastic, sir. Thank you for more than a fantastic podcast. It was a great learning experience of few hours for me.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking out the time from your busy schedule.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm
for the
sure
opportunity.
that the audience would have loved the conversation. Lot of nuggets of insights from your journey.
Thank you.
And I hope a lot of leaders, not using the word lightly, but operators rather, emerge who can drive the impact that the way you have driven.
Thank you
so
very much. Thank you for the opportunity. All of this, as I said, we are just Nimitt Matram. So I'm very grateful to have been born at a certain time in a certain family with a certain family that I have now, my wife and my son, who support me ideologically in a very nice way, who challenge me very nicely to do the right thing. And so those support systems are what is God-given, and then what you make of it is again God-given.
Absolutely, sir. So we'll end it with the note that we are Nimitt Matra, but we have free will.
We have free will.
And we always have to make the right choices.
Correct. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.